Hi, Lester, Wushu engineer. Kung Fu blade catching. Catching a blade with your bare hands. We see it repeated in many action films, perhaps because of its coolness factor. Most recently, the technique has made a couple of appearances in the recent blockbuster Aquaman. One of my students asked me to do some investigation into the practicalities of blade catching, so I have him to thank for this. First of all, is catching a sword blade a viable approach in combat? Well, as a matter of fact, grabbing an opponent's blade is a technique that is seen used quite a lot, actually, in both traditional Eastern and Western styles of sword combat. It's typically used to manipulate an opponent or their blade in some way to facilitate an attack of your own against them. But usually this grab is preceded by some form of weapon-based deflection or bind that robs the opponent's attack of its energy before the grab is attempted. None of the real traditional examples from the East or West that I am familiar with involve trying to catch a blade in full swing or thrust, because there's a serious amount of energy contained in those attacks. The kinetic energy in combination with the sharp blade edge makes attempting this kind of movement very risky indeed. But is it even Kung Fu? One of the central principles of true traditional Kung Fu or Wushu is to not collide with an opponent's force. Typically, true traditional Wushu uses a series of deflections and rotations to slip past an opponent's attacks while disrupting their opponents as little as possible. Trying to stop a blade by catching it in between your palms in this manner is a good example of a collision of force. It's a hard and inefficient way to deal with an opponent's attack, like stopping an opponent's punch by punching them in the fist and colliding with them. Also another cool technique that's shown in movies just for its sheer coolness factor. I've seen that used a couple of times. So you could say that catching an opponent's blade in this manner is not true Kung Fu. But is it possible? Mythbusters did an investigation once to test the myth using a pair of robotic hands, steel hands, covered in ballistic gelatin to simulate human hands with skin and flesh. They found that in attempting to stop the blade would cut into the flesh of the blade stopper's hands. This is a really good illustration of why a collision of force approach to stopping an opponent is not a good idea, especially when they're swinging a sword at you. But one of the missing components in the test was the effect that movement in a catcher's body might have in reducing or eliminating the effect of the sword cutting into their hands. Because as they're catching the blade, they may be accepting some of that force or energy in order to eliminate the blade cutting into their hands. So I decided to do a couple of tests. Note that partially because of YouTube's ban on doing potentially life-threatening stunts, but mostly because I'm not a blinking idiot, I have not performed any of these tests with a live steel blade. Sorry for the disappointment. And I'll just get Sherry to do the strike, and I'm not going to do anything about it at first, just so that you can see what speed. Oh, that's not very nice. I did a series of tests attempting the straight catch, which I'll play now. This just felt completely wrong, because it's alien to my approach to fighting. I do not believe that it would be a viable approach to dealing with a blade of mass and velocity with a keen edge. Next, I did a series of tests in which I deflected the blade to the side from the palm catch. So I would catch the blade and then deflect to the side to absorb some of that energy. Okay, so we'll go for it. Up. Faster. This felt better because I was no longer just trying to stop the blade. I was incorporating a deflection to allow the blade's energy to carry it to the side. However, because of the palm catch, this left one of my wrists potentially exposed to the blade's edge unless I twisted the blade to the side in the deflection. This was still not ideal. I then tried a few deflections in which I used only one hand to guide the blade past me. So I would guide the blade past and I would actually physically be moving as well to get out of the way. Although this would certainly not be something that I'd like to try for real, this kind of approach would probably be more survivable than catching a blade in between your palms. As a bit of fun, we tried the blade catching and deflection with a series of thrown knife attacks, using rubber knives, of course. Okay. Okay, so my prognosis. Hollywood is not a reliable source of information, and there are much better ways of dealing with an opponent or opponents armed with edged weapons. But I had fun doing the tests anyway. I hope you enjoyed it. Leave a comment below and like and subscribe if you're so inclined, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.